Hello, and a very warm welcome to this LinkedIn Live, also multi-streamed onto YouTube. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here today. I'm really looking forward to this session. We're going to delve into a really interesting project in Kigali in Rwanda that was approved at the last board meeting of the GCF. And there'll be some interesting things to see. It's a cities-oriented project, and those that attended last week, the wonderful session I had with Sophia Costello, you'll see some of the themes I'm going to mention and make some connections between what Sophia was talking about and what we're seeing in this project. So it's really great to see you here. Please do introduce yourselves in the comments. Of course, if you can't hear me or anything like that, it would be great if you could just let me know if that's all coming through. Do introduce yourself in the comments. It's great to see a bit of a community here, which is why I've put on the comments page available right here. And do ask questions. I'm really happy to try and adjust to move towards any issues that you'd really like to look into and talk about more. So ask away. I'll be as responsive as I can be. While we go, I'll also share a number of different slides, QR codes. So if you have your phone ready and you'd like to scan any of those QR codes, they'll just be links to the funding proposal so that you yourself can have a look at it after the session and such like. So let's jump into it without any further ado. We're going to focus on this cities project, but I want to give a quick promo for next week as well. Next week on Thursday, same time, same place, we'll be interviewing and having a conversation with Emilia Holdaway. She's a very experienced sustainability professional with over 25 years of experience in climate policy and finance. She works as a non-executive director for an organization and also has been, over the past 3 years, global head of climate risk policy at HSBC, the bank HSBC. Before that, she worked as a consultant, including with my company ECO. She was team leader on a country programming project that we did for the GCF. So it'll be really great to speak with her at that time. What we will do in this discussion is talk about funding proposal FP245, which is the Green City Kigali project. Its full title is Green City Kigali, a new model for urban development in Rwanda, and it was submitted by the Rwanda Ministry of the Environment. This project aims to create a climate-resilient, green and inclusive neighborhood in Kigali through upgrading informal settlements with sustainable infrastructure, promoting green technologies, and really empowering communities. And I love the project. It's really very interesting to see what has been put into it and how it's been put together. Now, rather than introducing the project myself, I've extracted a couple of minutes from the video of the board meeting where Henry Gonzalez, the Chief Investment Officer of the fund, introduces it. After that, we'll discuss a number of different things, including the ambitions of the project, the theory of change. We'll have a look at the work that was done in terms of the feasibility study, have some inputs and thoughts around economic and financial impacts of the project, a few things that I noticed along the way. So it'll be a bit make it up as we go along. We're going to show you parts of the funding proposal, and let's take a bit of a dive together into those elements. We will have ample opportunity for questions. Really great to see you here, Simon Pierre, Kiteji. Fantastic joining us from Togo. It's really great to see you here. And others, if you're there, please do post a quick message to say hello, where you're from, and ask questions. So let's, without further ado, jump straight into the presentation from Henry Gonzalez,
Co-chair,
from the GCF.
FP245, Green City, Kigali. Rwanda is urbanizing rapidly under already significant climate variability, which is leading to increased heat and more erratic heavy precipitation in the country. The resulting floods and landslides in informal peri-urban expansion areas around Kigali currently lead to a destruction of homes, infrastructure, livelihoods, and sadly sometimes lives. The government of Rwanda is committed to address these climate challenges posed to large parts of its urban population by changing the paradigm of public investments. The Green City Kigali Master Plan for Kinyinya Hill sets out a complete settlement with climate risk reducing infrastructure and decentralized low carbon basic services. On-site vocational training will enable the community to upskill and partake in the green transformation, building sustainable and resilient livelihoods. The Green City Kigali project will allow Rwanda to put into practice this changing paradigm and invest comprehensively into climate-compatible upgrading to build climate resilience for the existing communities and new residents in the future, making the recurrent flooding, landslides, loss of lives, and livelihoods a thing of the past. This funding proposal also benefited from the project preparation facility.
All right. So Mr. Gonzalez was saying at the end, this project benefited from the project preparation facility. I'm sorry, I cut off his last words there. So that means that funding was provided by the GCF to the accredited entity in this case, who hired expertise in order to support the development of the project preparation facility. Now, I put a QR code up here. This goes to the GCF page where you can download the funding proposal. Have a look at that if you would like to. So if you want to queue it up or come back to the recording and pick it up later, that would be a good plan. I'm going to dive into showing part of this. So just going to share my screen and look into parts of the project. Now, when we jump into it, I think you're going to see a number of things that really stand out. Firstly, the project does integrate climate resilience and mitigation. There was a question during the board meeting after it was introduced, and questions were posed by the board around why the project was put forward purely as an adaptation project, not a mitigation one. So I'll spend a little bit of time, we'll look into that and see where this project stands in terms of resilience and mitigation, and the response that came from the Secretariat and the accredited entity. The other thing that is interesting is this multi-sector approach. It's working at an informal settlement, part of a larger informal settlement, integrating investments in resilience infrastructure, there are household energy solutions, community facilities. And this comprehensive approach at a urban level, the city level, is fantastic to see. Not just doing one particular theme, but an integrated approach. Of course, this makes the project more complicated. The other thing noted by the board members when they were reviewing this project in October last year was around social inclusion and gender equality. The project really does prioritize this. I'm quite impressed by the gender assessment that was done, really thorough, really clearly presented. Yeah, have a look at that. Have a look at some of the conclusions from it when you dig into the proposal. That's on page 99 of the funding proposal document I'm showing here. Okay, scalability and replicability. This was also raised by board members. The idea is that this is a model that can then be replicated in other locations, not reinvented each time, but it serves as a model for future upgrading projects in Kigali and in other places, perhaps in other cities in the world. Kitegi Simon may be in Togo as well. This would be an interesting opportunity. So we look carefully at it there. All right, so that I think is a great approach to a GCF project. Create a model in a focused area where you can have sufficient scale to really make a difference, and design it as something that is a model that can be replicated in other areas. Then, and the project includes some technical assistance to facilitate that replication in Rwanda. And then the knowledge management and capacity building. The project really emphasizes this knowledge sharing, capacity building. We noted that 2 weeks ago when I was joined by my colleague Louisa to talk about the Crew Angola project, where there are these centers for building capacity. In this project as well, there's a TVET center that is created right there in the community in this informal settlement. That means that the and it was commented and acknowledged as a good practice by the ITAP, the Independent Technical Advisory Panel of the GCF, that locating the center right there in the informal community was a great move for access, for people being able to benefit from it. It's a training program for construction workers, for professionals. Also, there's elements of training for government officials to enhance their understanding and implementation of climate resilient practices. Now, this funding proposal I'm showing on screen at the moment, just something that I noted here, the first submission of the project. For those of you that are working on GCF projects, we've seen a few GCF projects recently that have been quite quick, sort of 8 months from the time they're submitted to approved. In this case, it was submitted in 2022. It's quite important. And the current submission was in August of 2024, and it's version number 4. So they've gone through a few iterations for this. Now, that's not a problem really, except that all of the studies that were done in 2021. And this was commented by the ITAP, by the GCF Secretariat, and by others. It's notable there are many prices that are given that will have changed during the time. And in the risk management framework, in this proposal, there is a section that's talking about the ongoing impacts of COVID. So that was still included and not removed at any time. But you just see that this was a project designed in 2021 that was finally approved in 2024. If you're working on projects, that idea of long period for development and iterations and such like is very notable. Now, the next thing to have a quick look at is this question of adaptation versus mitigation. In the GCF project, this is the mitigation part, this is the adaptation part. And you can see that all of the GCF contribution and all of the co-financing contribution all contributes to adaptation. And they've chosen most vulnerable people and communities, health and well-being, and infrastructure and built environment, because there are direct investments going into the reconstruction of this informal settlement. This has got the bulk of the funding. 83% of the overall funding goes into this. Now, it was raised during the board meeting, why is this not also a mitigation project? The proposal on its front page gives a quantified co-benefit of CO2, but no mitigation outcome. If you have a look at the project on the GCF website with the QR code that I shared with you, you will see that's up there in the top right of the page. You'll see that the GCF has got emission reductions for the project as its description of the impacts of the project, not as a co-benefit. It's a little bit of an interesting element. It was asked at the board meeting, the GCF and AE responded that the quantification of the emission reductions was, so it was deemed to be much smaller than expected. and that the emission reductions were in a way not smaller than expected, smaller compared to the adaptation outcome. So there's this difference. This project is predominantly adaptation. There's also an indication that they don't yet know the exact figures that will come out of the project. And some interesting differentiation between the ITAP and the GCF Secretariat's assessment of the project, where they calculated the emission reductions and the cost per ton of emissions reductions. ITAP came up with a completely different figure from the Secretariat. We can dig into that if we have time and if there's any interest in that. So that is why, at the end of the day, this project became an adaptation-only project. My recommendation, if you're developing such projects, is always to try and make it either mitigation or adaptation, less cross-cutting. If you've got a mitigation project, maybe make it cross-cutting, because GCF is trying to boost the adaptation side. But if you've got an adaptation project with some small impacts related to mitigation, when you're submitting it to the GCF, I would suggest to go with this approach. I really like this idea that you can put forward a project that is an adaptation project, still with dedicated mitigation activities like improved cooking stoves, like street lighting, that would go into also the mitigation side, but put it down as a co-benefit. Okay, so that was the second part of this. And thanks for people making notes in the comments, where you're from. Hello, Mark. Great to see you here. And fantastic you're working in resilient infrastructure. Sonara, was great to speak with you just a short while ago. And thank you very much for joining. And Nises Aman from Côte d'Ivoire, bienvenue to you and colleagues. So thank you very much. Now, let's look into a bit more detail around this. The executing entity, just to mention it, this project is submitted by the Ministry of Environment. Fantastic, locally led, locally put together the project, and real ownership there. I love to see that. And the executing entity is well-known organization, FONERWA, is the National Fund for the Environment in Rwanda. It's got strong capacity. You can see the assessment in this document around it, that actually will deliver the project. Great choice, great approach. I love the way that Rwanda has got an accredited entity that is within the ministry, and they make use of funds repeatedly, like FONERWA. You see them appearing in many, many different climate-related projects. Obviously, National Fund for the Environment, it makes such a difference to have this strong local ownership to drive forward priorities that really make sense for the country. I really love to see a project like this. Okay, so let's jump forward into some of the details of the project. What is this project all about? So what I would like to show you is briefly this page. This is the theory of change. I'm going to zoom into it, but I've spent in the last few sessions that I've done looking into funded GCF projects, I've spent some time looking at the theory of change. In this case, we're going to only take a quick look at that, because I'd love to jump into the logical framework and also the problem tree and solution tree that the consultants that put together this project produced. I think they're really informative and really interesting to see, and you don't often see that in feasibility studies. So kudos to Sweco, who put together this this project. All right, so here we have the theory of change. Theory of change, remember, I don't really like GCF theories of change because they're just an articulation of the logical framework, but they are a useful diagram. So maybe I should stop saying I don't really like the structure of it, because they're really useful to get a quick one-page overview of what the project's all about. Right at the top, of course, is the impact potential, but let's just look down at the outcomes and the co-benefits. So just to jump into it, there are essentially two outcomes. Firstly, strengthened adaptive capacity, heat stress mitigation, and reduced exposure to climate risks. I have no idea exactly why they've put the word heat stress there. Let's not stress too much about that. And why they would put that in as opposed to reduction to exposure to climate risks. If you look at the impact potential, it says if this project goes ahead, then vulnerable households will have reduced exposure to there's landslides, flooding, and heat stress, along with better living conditions and improved access to public circuits. But I wanted to identify those three: landslides, flooding, heat stress, because those are directly linked to the climate impacts of the project. So there is a climate hazard that is affecting this population, and the project will directly reduce exposure to those hazards. So that's the climate rationale in a nutshell that is behind the project. The second outcome, I've already mentioned, the idea of capacity building. This is around strengthened institutional and regulatory systems for climate responsive planning and development. So that's the second component, but almost all the money is going into here. If we've got time, we can look in the budget, but vast majority of the budget is for this adaptive capacity, and it's going to cover both resilient water, transport, water and energy, and improved waste management and community facilities. So there are two main aspects to that. And then I already mentioned that aspect of strengthening. There's capacity building, community engagement, and knowledge management. This is a small part of that overall project. There are co-benefits. These are shown here. Reduced energy intensity, gender empowerment through inclusive planning and capacity building, and enhanced local skills and development. Interesting. Yeah, well, there's the energy intensity aspect. So this is the mitigation co-benefit. This is the adaptation benefit of the project, impact of the project, as well as that. All right. So yeah, hopefully that's a useful quick dive into it. Now, when we put together projects like this, we develop a problem tree, and then we turn that into a solution tree. And guess what? That's exactly what the consultants have done in this project. So let me just look first here. So this is a section of the feasibility study, which is called the climate-induced problem here. So this is a problem tree, essentially, problem tree analysis. And you can see some of the effects. So essentially, this is where the climate effect is. So the roots of the project are further down. And you're looking at a problem tree. It's a tree. So you go all the way up to the top. These are the ultimate, whoopsie daisy. Sorry about that. These are the ultimate impacts of the project, and climate-induced problem is there in the middle. What happens? Well, increased vulnerability because of climate change leads to what happens? Well, loss of shelter, food and water scarcity, reduced access, poor public health. These are the immediate impacts of that, which leads to reduced livability, yeah, maybe, and poverty trap. I'm not too clear on this particular step in the overall picture. Reduced livability, we'd have to dig into it a bit more to understand what that means. I mean, we know that it means that this informal settlement has got reduced livability, but I think it's something to do with financial economic prospects and quality of life. Okay, that's interesting aspect to it. Now let's go down into the roots of the project. So we can see here there are this we would call a non-climate hazard. Yeah, rapid urbanization, urban sprawl, lack of capacity, lack of infrastructure, informal settlements. So we're making our way up here. Lack of local ownership and governance, a big problem in informal settlements that contribute here. So we've got some aspects that are non-climatic, Yeah, because of course it's a combination of aspects that have to do with climate change and baseline, what is actually happening, these causes. And then on this side, they've gone actually back a long way to greenhouse gas emissions there. And the emissions cause climate change, which leads to extreme rain, increased heat. So these are the climate, whoopsie daisy, let me see if I can write that out, climate hazards. So here we've got the climate hazards. The extreme rain is leading to erosion, floods, and landslides. And the increased heat is leading to seasonal drought, reduction in biodiversity, wildfires, and the urban heat island. So yes, there was an urban heat island, but it's exacerbated by the increased heat that is clearly derived from climate change, not just natural causes and natural changes. All right, so that's the problem tree. And what we do when we do this, if this is new to you, maybe it is to some people here, we take the problem tree and we make a mirror image of it, and we rewrite each one of the aspects that can be rewritten for the climate positive future, the solution as we would see it. So really fantastic to see that there's a very similar diagram here, which is the solution tree analysis for the project. So you can see here, this is the main, it's one word for the main impact that this project is going to do. It's going to create this green city, Kigali. It's in one part of the country. And what does it do? It's going to use, according to this diagram, life cycle carbon reduction, capacity building, and economic and financial tools. Now, capacity building is on its way to infrastructure. I don't fully get that because, in fact, Green City, I would put this aspect at the same level here. And this is just my own opinion. I'm not trying to criticize the project in any way, but just thinking it through, what would we do? We have Green City Kigali, which is predominantly a result of sustainable urban infrastructure. But maybe what they're trying to emphasize here is that the capacity building for local ownership through this training center is the way that the sustainable urban infrastructure will be delivered. That's an interesting aspect for it, in which case, yes, this type of structure is very suitable. So there's upgrade and formalization of the settlements. Formalization means local ownership, and that reduces the threat. So this is, in a way, the impacts that we have on what is very clearly this aspect of the project, which is, this is the climate picture. And there is an arrow here, life cycle carbon reduction. The impacts of this project to reduce emissions, to slow, stop, or reverse climate change are extremely minimal. And these informal settlements, the people living in the informal settlements, are minor contributors to the overall impact of the project, to the overall climate change that is caused. It would be interesting to look at use of charcoal and open fires and that sort of impact, because black carbon emitted from these types of open fires has quite a strong forcing effect, although it's not one of the formal Kyoto greenhouse gases, but there's some interesting aspects there. All right, so problem tree, we've got that. And I want to move just to another diagram, which is here, about what the project is actually doing, which is way back at near the end of the feasibility study. We were right down here at page 122 of the feasibility study. These are the measures that were identified. Some of them are urban infrastructure. This is the capacity building measures, and this is the carbon reduction measures. So there are 5 carbon reduction measures: PV, solar PV, it's at a household level, and or maybe community level, improved cook stoves, energy efficient lighting, centralized wastewater treatment, and a biogas system at the market. And in fact, here, this biogas system is interesting because it's through communal market based toilets in the central market, which will be connected to a biogas system and used for energy. Right. The sustainable infrastructure aspects are really fantastic to see here. Many of those aspects of what Sophia spoke about last time. And in case you're interested in it, here is, I'm going to put up on the top left of the screen now, the LinkedIn Live. So you may want to make a note to that if you didn't catch it last time. Sophia was just fantastic in talking about aspects of this in terms of urban infrastructure. She focused on trees, and it's very interesting to see that there is no real intention to plant trees as a way of addressing the urban heat island aspect. But there are many other aspects into this project. Firstly, we've got here construction of green rights of way, green road, blue-green stormwater management, expansion of central water supply, okay, rainwater harvesting, that's a supplement to central water supply, filters for household water treatment, latrine improvements, community composting, waste recycling, and recycling collection stations. So these are all the aspects of it. Very interesting is the capacity building aspects here. So you can see in capacity building aspects are these ones, because they're around technical and vocational education. And by improving and by giving people income, this can lead effectively to delivering improved resilience, because there is more disposable income, or even people are moving from extreme poverty to poverty, yes, so they've got greater resources to be able to respond to climate change. So that's the aspect of resilience, and to invest in this adaptation aspect. These are the sustainable infrastructure aspects of the project, and this is the life cycle carbon reduction for it. So I like these diagrams, as you've probably gathered. This, I think, is a very persuasive way of putting it. Yes, you'd put the problem tree, the solution tree into the annex, into the feasibility study. Nice feasibility study. Interestingly, this was completed in 2021, so a lot has changed since that time. A few pictures for those familiar with what an informal settlement looks like. It's perhaps useful to see. This is a community meeting place. It's noted in the report. Here you can see lots of vegetation related to farming in the settlement, but it's noted in the report that there are very few trees, and there's a lot of compacted mud in areas, and that made me think of Sophia's session with that link up in the top left. The idea of using trees perhaps to enhance the quality of the settlement is an interesting one. They've got a lot of areas where water is captured to reduce the speed of runoff that are, for example, grassed or with bushes and such like in the design, which is very nice to see. Okay, so a very interesting analysis, and in fact the GCF part of this project is going to fund activities that are over on this part of the informal settlement, and there's been already something happening here, if I've got it correctly. That picture is not intended for that. That's the location of nearby schools. And for you, if you're familiar with informal settlements, here's what happens when there is runoff that is very fast and sudden from flooding, from downpour of rain. You have this type of overall impact. Because of this soil that is very compacted, you can see that the runoff is extremely quick. So some of the ideas that were put forward were elements to reduce the runoff and the flow rate of runoff through, I think it's called swales and such like. Okay, I see time is running. I would love to answer some questions. So if you have one, please do put it in the comments, put it in the chat. I'd love to see it. And in fact, chat comments are really valuable as well for promoting this video. So if you're finding it's useful, putting in a few comments will help more people with relevant background that are interested in urban development and climate change. If you put in comments, that'll really heighten the algorithm that LinkedIn uses to show it to more people. So that would be appreciated. All right. So let's jump then into the logical framework. And I will just soldier on until 1:15 unless there are questions that come in along the way. All right. So the logical framework in a funding proposal like this, it's built in to the funding proposal. Why I mention that is that 2 weeks ago we looked at the Crew Angola project, and there the logical framework is in a separate document for a smaller type of project, simplified approval process. A logical framework essentially goes from the top impact down to the activity level. So you can see the GCF results areas right at the top. And then you can dig into the outcomes and each of the different elements of it. What is notable here, and I just tried to find the beneficiaries. Let me backtrack very slightly. The project on the GCF website is having an impact at around 30,000 direct beneficiaries and more than 1 million indirect beneficiaries. ITAP, the Independent Technical Advisory Panel, made some comments about that indirect beneficiaries because the project team had chosen the whole of Kigali as indirect beneficiaries. I guess the 30,000 people that are direct beneficiaries, exactly 50-50 male and female, comes from the population of the entire area of the project. But interestingly, health, well-being, food and water security has got 1,600 beneficiaries, and infrastructure is around the US dollars invested. So the core indicator that GCF uses, they tell you must use this indicator for impacts on infrastructure and built environment, is the value of physical assets. So that is 5.4 million. But I can't find the beneficiaries. There is a little note that says targets to be set at the inception phase of the project. So there are no overall beneficiaries in terms of most vulnerable people and communities. So exactly where that comes from. Now the ITAP refers to Annex 24, but we don't have Annex 24. We have all the other annexes, but not Annex 24. So the beneficiary calculations are not easily available to us. Not that I'm questioning it, but interestingly, in the logical framework, the number of beneficiaries is quite different. The log frame goes down into the actual specific outcomes and outputs for the project itself. And it includes, for example, strengthened adaptive capacity and stress. And it says number of households is 301 households. So those are the people in this informal community. You can't get 30,000 from that figure, just saying. And then length of streets to be improved, walkways, area planted with green swales. A number that is there. So yeah, it's interesting to see a log frame that, to my reading, is not consistent with what I'm seeing at other points and on the front page of the overall document. I'm not seeing these types of figures anywhere in the documentation that's been made available to us. Okay. All right. Is it possible to have the feasibility study? Yeah. What I will do is I will put in the comments after the end of the show, maybe 10 minutes after or so, I will put a link to the feasibility study for it. There's a little trick that if you're working on GCF projects, you need to know. Head to the GCF board meeting section. Let me actually show that right here and now, because I think it's an important aspect. So if we go into the Green Climate Fund website, what's going on there? Yep, here we are. Green Climate Fund. You go to the board meeting. So maybe this is the way to answer you on this question. If you go to the board meetings and you go to past board meetings, then you head to the board meeting at which the project was approved. Then don't go to approved projects, but look for the project over here, and it's 245. You head into that, and there you will find a possibility to download the annexes. They're not easily available, but you can find the annexes and extract them there. So thank you very much for that question. All right, so I think I've answered that. That's for the feasibility study here. We've got Nay from Lebanon. Let me put this onto the screen as we read it together. I'll just get the beginning of it and I'll read the rest to you as we go. So Nay has written, experience in environmental management consulting, currently pursue an MSc in climate change. Would be interested to know, okay, if there is any leniency in the adaptation measures of the project in light of new research, data, climate change impacts in Kigali, as well as technologies from 2021 till now. ITAP did make comments about the age of the project, but mostly related to costs. But I think there is certainly there are a number of areas in which I would say there's leniency around that aspect, and specifically for this project to do with impacts and things like that. So, yeah, I think that could be an aspect of it. And you saw in the logical framework that we were looking at a short while ago that there is an intention to, I've jumped to the wrong page for it, but there's an intention there to have an idea that you will work out some of these indicators when the project kicks off. So that aspect. And then you've gone on to number 2 and number 3. And thank you, Nay, for this input. Would there be additional data collection involved? Most definitely. In the annexes, you will find a whole monitoring and evaluation framework with annual monitoring intentions and goals, establishing baselines at the beginning of the project, the middle of the project, the end of the project, and such like. Just some of the data that's in the funding proposal is not particularly complete, or at least some of it is dated. And your third part of your question is there a framework as part of this project to incentivize private investment? The answer is no, there isn't. This is a 100% grant-funded project. In the ITAP comments, there's an observation. Let me see if I can call up those ITAP comments here, just to show them briefly, if my computer will catch up. So this is in that funding proposal. Here is the ITAP's review, and you will see that there are a range of comments around the fact that this is a grant-oriented project. Yeah, just why this is highlighted in yellow is that Annex 24, the grant-funded project, and it's for people who are in extremely vulnerable poverty, extremely vulnerable, living in extreme poverty in the city. If I can find it, I will show it. Otherwise, I might just jump straight on, which is really the important aspect of that, and that therefore it's grant funded. The ITAP felt that there could perhaps have been other types of private investment in the area, but bear in mind the people living here are living in extreme poverty, and therefore their ability to pay And so the ability for private sector to thrive, apart from the market and such like, is perhaps somewhat limited. Although that very interesting project in Malaysia, a different type of environment around trees and building up community ownership and private sector, it could be some interesting aspect to consider there. So thank you very much for the comment, and I've used all the time. It's been a really great pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to be meeting and speaking with Emilia at the next session. I'm actually going to turn off that QR code, but we'll be meeting with Emilia Holdaway at the next session, talking about some of her experience related to climate risk and some of the background to the work that she did at HSBC, also her work prior to that and current related to accelerating access to climate finance throughout the world. I think it's going to be a great session. So next week on Thursday at 2:30 UK time, we'll have a fantastic guest. So you won't just have to listen to me throughout the session. It's been really great to be here. Please continue to engage in the post. As I mentioned, it's a great help for that. And I wish you all the best in your climate finance endeavors. We've got a really challenging time ahead of us, but I think there's cause to be optimistic when you look at a project like this. It's challenging because of reduction in availability of funding and financing and this terrible, awful USAID situation and fiasco. It's just very saddening and really huge impacts throughout the world from just such a naive perspective. But I think we can also be optimistic. There are people like those that put together this project that are driving forward to make a difference to people, vulnerable people, and improve lives. So let's all continue working on that. I'm sure we can make a massive difference. Great to see you here. Goodbye.